The invitation, when it came, was not an act of kindness. It was a performance. Alistair Finch, a man whose fortune had been made in the brutal, lightning-fast world of tech mergers, stood on the manicured flagstone patio of his sprawling estate. His voice, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, boomed with a manufactured bonhomie. "Samuel," he called out. Samuel Jones looked up from the bed of prize-winning hydrangeas he was meticulously tending. His hands, covered in a fine layer of dark, rich soil, stilled. He was a man of 50, with a quiet, steady presence that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. His face, etched with the fine lines of a life lived outdoors, was calm, his eyes observant. "Yes, Mr. Finch?" Alistair gestured grandly towards the house, where caterers were bustling and the clinking of fine crystal could be heard. "I'm having a few friends over tonight. A little wine tasting. Some very, very special bottles. It occurred to me, you work so hard here, surrounded by all this, well, you ought to see how the other half lives, eh?" He chuckled, a sound as dry as old paper. "Come by around 8. You can stand in the back, observe. It might be educational for you." The condescension was as thick and cloying as the cheap perfume Alistair's wife favored. It hung in the air between the two men, a foul, invisible smog. Samuel's eyes, for a fleeting moment, lost their placid calm and flickered with something else, a spark of ancient fire, quickly extinguished. He simply nodded, the gesture economical and dignified. "That's kind of you to offer, sir," Samuel said, his voice even. "I'll be there." Alistair clapped his hands together, the performance complete. "Splendid. Don't feel you need to dress up. Your work clothes are authentic." He turned and strode back toward the house, already mentally recounting the story for his friends, painting himself as the benevolent lord of the manor. Samuel watched him go, then slowly returned to his hydrangeas. He gently cupped a vibrant blue blossom, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. He knew Alistair Finch. He knew the type. New money, desperate to be seen as old aristocracy. A man who collected expensive things, art, cars, wine, not for the love of them, but for the status they conferred. He didn't appreciate the soil, only the house built upon it. He didn't appreciate the vine, only the price tag on the bottle. As evening fell, Samuel went home to his small, neat cottage on the far edge of the estate. He showered, the scent of soil and sweat washing away. He didn't put on his work clothes. Instead, he opened a modest closet and chose a simple, clean, dark gray button-down shirt and pressed black trousers. They were old, but immaculate. He looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was not just a gardener. He was a man with a history, a man holding a secret he hadn't had a reason to share in a very long time. The wine cellar at Finch Manor was Alistair's pride and joy. It was less a cellar and more a subterranean cathedral to Bacchus, all polished mahogany, brushed nickel, and climate-controlled glass. Bottles lay in their racks like sleeping soldiers, their labels whispering of legendary vintages and astronomical prices. Alistair's friends were variations of himself, a hedge fund manager named Julian, a real estate mogul named Marcus, and a surgeon named Todd who had married into wealth. They were loud, preening men, their conversation a contest of acquisitions. "This 05 Margaux is decent, Alistair," Julian declared, swilling the deep red liquid in his oversized glass with far too much vigor. "A bit obvious on the nose, perhaps. Lacks subtlety." He said it's subtlety, as if it were a word he just learned and was desperate to use correctly. Marcus sniffed his glass. "I'm getting leather." "Yes, definitely leather." "And, is that cherry?" Samuel stood quietly in the shadows near the door, just as he'd been instructed. He held a glass of water, his posture relaxed, his presence so unassuming he might as well have been part of the decor. He listened. They weren't tasting wine, they were performing a script they'd learned from glossy magazines. They used words like full-bodied, oaky, and a finish as blunt instruments, missing every nuance. They held their glasses by the bowl, their body heat slowly cooking the expensive liquid within. It was an amateurish display, and Samuel felt a pang of sorrow for the magnificent wines being so thoroughly misunderstood. Alistair, playing the role of magnanimous host, moved through the tasting, presenting a respectable flight of wines, a crisp Sancerre, a buttery Californian Chardonnay, a solid Barolo. With each bottle, he would offer a snippet of information he'd memorized from a wine auction catalog. Then came the main event. With a theatrical flourish, Alistair produced a bottle from a special, reverently lit alcove. The label was simple, almost austere, but to those who knew, it was the equivalent of a holy text. Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, Romanée-Conti Grand Cru. 1990. A hush fell over the room. Even these men, for all their bluster, understood they were in the presence of royalty. This wasn't just wine, it was a myth in a bottle, a vintage that critics had awarded perfect scores, a wine that sold for tens of thousands of dollars. Only about 450 cases of Romanée-Conti are produced each year, making it one of the rarest and most sought-after wines on the planet. Gentlemen, Alistair said, his voice trembling slightly with a mixture of excitement and the pressure of the moment. The 90 drc. He performed the opening with painstaking care, the old cork sighing as it left the bottle. He poured a small, precise amount into each glass. The wine was a mesmerizing shade of ruby, fading to a delicate brick orange at the rim. The men lifted their glasses, their usual bravado replaced by a tentative reverence. They sniffed. They sipped. Silence. Julian, the self-proclaimed expert, was the first to break it. Incredible, he breathed. So powerful. Very red fruit. And earth. A lot of earth. It was a description so generic it could have applied to a garden vegetable. Marcus, not to be outdone, added, it's very smooth. A velvety mouthfeel. He swirled it again, looking for more words and finding none. Alistair's face tightened. He had spent a fortune on this moment, and his audience was failing him. Their clumsy praise was an insult to the wine's legendary complexity. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the silent figure in the corner. An idea, cruel and arrogant, sparked in his mind. He would use Samuel as a foil, a comedic beat to highlight the sophistication of the moment, even if his friends were failing to provide it. He smiled, a predator's smile. And what about you, Samuel, he called out, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. Our man of the soil. What does your gardener's palate make of this? The other men snickered. The surgeon, Todd, smirked. Be careful, Samuel. That's probably more than your monthly salary in that glass. Samuel's gaze met Alistair's. The quiet dignity never left his face, but the fire in his eyes was back, and this time it was not extinguished. He took a slow step forward, out of the shadows and into the soft light of the cellar. May I, he asked, his voice calm but resonant. He gestured to the glass in Alistair's hand. Surprised, Alistair handed it over. This was better than he'd hoped. The gardener was going to play along. Samuel did not immediately sip it. Instead, he began a ritual, a dance of analysis so practiced and fluid that it silenced the room. He held the glass by its stem, tilting it against the white of a napkin he'd pulled from his pocket to observe the color. The color is a moderate ruby with a significant garnet and tawny fade at the rim, indicating some age, he began, his voice changing. The quiet, deferential tone was gone, replaced by one of crisp, analytical authority. The viscosity is moderate, forming slow, thick tears, suggesting a higher alcohol content and significant glycerol. He brought the glass to his nose, not taking a deep, brutish sniff, but a series of short, sharp inhalations. The nose is profound, he said, closing his eyes. The primary aromas are of dried red cherry, wild raspberry, and a hint of desiccated strawberry. But it's the secondary and tertiary notes that are truly singing. He paused. There's sous-bois, the forest floor, after a rain. Wet leaves, black truffle, and a distinct note of foraged mushroom. The men stared, their smirks frozen on their faces. I'm also detecting dried rose petal, hibiscus, a touch of crushed violet. And behind that, more savory notes, cured meat, a hint of leather, star anise, and a whisper of Chinese five-spice. The oak integration is seamless, a touch of cedar, like a fine cigar box, but it's fully subsumed by the fruit and terroir. He swirled the wine gently, aerating it. The bouquet is opening up now. That initial reticence is gone. Finally, he took a sip. He didn't swallow. He let the wine coat his entire palate, his cheeks puffing slightly as he drew in a small amount of air through his lips, a technique known as retronasal olfaction. The room was utterly silent save for the faint, gurgling sound. He held the wine in his mouth for a long moment before gracefully turning to the silver spittoon on the service table and expectorating the liquid in a clean, precise stream. Alistair's jaw was slack. Julian looked as if he'd been slapped. Samuel stood straight, his eyes focused on the middle distance as if reading a sacred text only he could see. The palate confirms the nose, but with more intensity. The acidity is still remarkably vibrant for its age, a racy, high-tone line that keeps the wine from feeling heavy. The tannins are completely resolved, silky, supple, like worn velvet. The fruit is delicate, leaning more toward sour cherry and pomegranate now. But the finish is where the magic lies. He waited. The silence stretched, thick with astonishment. The finish lasts for well over a minute. It returns to those savory, umami notes, the truffle, the damp earth, a saline minerality that speaks of the limestone-rich soil of Romanée. It's a wine of incredible complexity and finesse, perfectly balanced, at its absolute peak. A truly contemplative experience. He looked directly at Alistair. It is, without a doubt, a 1990 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. And it is magnificent. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer awkward. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Julian was the first to find his voice, a choked whisper. My God. How could you possibly know all that? Samuel's gaze softened, the analytical fire receding, replaced by a gentle melancholy. He looked down at his hands, the hands of a gardener, calloused and strong. Before I tended gardens, he said quietly, I tended cellars. Before I cultivated roses, I cultivated relationships with vintners. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces. For 15 years, I was the head sommelier at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris. I spent years of my life studying for the Court of Master Sommeliers examination. It's one of the most difficult tests in the world. He let that sink in. The exam has 3 parts, a blind tasting of 6 wines in 25 minutes, a comprehensive theory exam, and a live service practical. The pass rate is often less than 10%. I failed the tasting portion twice. It took me 7 years to earn my pin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple object, a small, circular lapel pin, a silver star engraved cluster against a red background. He held it in the palm of his soil-stained hand. The pin of a master sommelier. There are fewer than 300 people in the world who hold the title. I was Samuel Jones, MS, he said. One of only a handful of black master sommeliers in the world. Alistair Finch, for the first time in his adult life, was speechless. He felt the blood drain from his face, replaced by a hot, creeping wave of shame. He had tried to use this man as a prop, a simpleton for his own amusement. And that simpleton had just effortlessly dissected a wine that Alistair himself barely understood, with a level of expertise that made him and his friends look like clumsy children. What happened? Marcus asked, his voice now respectful, quiet. Why are you? He gestured vaguely at Samuel's simple clothes, at the idea of him kneeling in the dirt. A sad smile touched Samuel's lips. My wife passed away. The life, the 18-hour days, the pressure, the constant travel, it lost its meaning. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be close to the earth, to watch things grow. It's a different kind of complexity. A different kind of reward. He placed the wine glass gently back on the table. Thank you for the taste, Mr. Finch. It was a privilege to be reacquainted with an old friend. He gave a slight, formal nod to the room and turned to leave. Wait, Alistair croaked, his voice hoarse. The arrogance had been stripped from him, leaving behind a raw, humbled man. Samuel. Mr. Jones. I am so sorry. I was an arrogant fool. Samuel paused at the door, his back still to the room. Teach me, Alistair said, the words tumbling out. Don't just work in my garden. Teach me. About the wine. For real this time. Please. Samuel turned his head slightly, and a genuine, warm smile finally lit up his face. I think, he said, the authority and the gentleness now perfectly blended, I would like that very much. We'll start tomorrow. Not here, he gestured to the ostentatious cellar. But in the vineyard. Where it all begins. In the soil. He walked out, leaving 4 of the wealthiest men in the city standing in stunned, humbled silence, the ghost of a perfect wine on their palates and the profound realization that they knew nothing at all. If you were moved by Samuel's story of quiet dignity and hidden genius, show your support by hitting that like button. And for more stories that challenge our perceptions and celebrate the unexpected masters among us, don't forget to subscribe.